Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cryosphere Pavilion. My name is Christina, and I'm a geophysicist at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, which is Shiva Prakash, who will give a presentation entitled Advancing Sea Level Projections from Ice Sheets to Our Coastal Futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon, rather. Thanks for joining me today. So, like she said, I will be talking about a couple of different things, mostly try and tie the story of sea level from how ice sheets flow and their role in raising global sea level and what that means in the coastal regions around the world. And I will be focusing primarily on the coastal regions where I live, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm a PhD candidate there at Georgia Tech. So this, I'll let it play. This is, So this is a video of a place pretty close to where I live, about 4 hours away by car. And this is exactly what it looked like, I think, in 2015, around this time of the year, and actually what it looks like right now. The road, it's a highway connecting the city of Savannah in coastal Georgia to an island called Tybee Island, and it faces high tide flooding quite frequently. So it's the only highway connecting this one inhabited island there with a few hundred thousands of people, and this is what they face on a regular basis annually. And pretty close to it, there is a tide gauge that has been taking observations of the sea level over approximately the last century, I would say. And this is what the local sea level trend looks like at that location. And this is starting from, I think, when the observational record started in around 1930s, all the way up until present day. And you can see it's been rising pretty steadily. The straight lines are the linear trend there. But what does that mean for the local communities there? It's the number of flooded days per year has been increasing. It's been more frequent of late, and even if you look at projections going forward, it is expected to sort of touch around or threefold and even fivefold or tenfold by say the middle of this century. So rising sea levels pose increasing flood risks to these regions. This is a map that came out from a report of the Union of Concerned Scientists earlier this year. They put together a study of critical infrastructure around the US that might be affected in different regions across both the coasts due to sea level rise. And it's a lot of different types of infrastructure as well. It can be public, it can be educational institutions. It's also a lot of Superfund sites, which are like sort of environmentally critical zones. The number was close to around 1,000, where you would have 900 sites, say by around 2050, where you would have flooding every other week or so. So it's a fairly important problem. And again, just a map of the same region. You can see Tybee Island there on the right, to your right, and this is what it looks like. Well, this is what it looks like without any sort of mean water levels. And if you had added 0.3 meters of sea level, 0.6, and close to around 1 meter of sea level. So a lot of flood inundation is expected. And you also see some regions where they have set up levees, but then there are regions around it where the water can actually go around it and behind. So the story is not just this for one city in the southeast of the US. This is fairly a similar story across the globe, and this is a map. This is a plot rather of global sea level rise, and it is rising at an accelerating pace. This is a study that came out a few years ago, looking at the different contributors to sea level rise globally, and you can see there glaciers, the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets, and sort of the expansion of ocean waters due to warming. These are all contributors, and in the blue is what you see as the observed mean global sea level. And this is also up to around present day, 2020. And some of you, or most of you, might have seen this figure as well. This is, again, global mean sea level from the IPCC report, the AR6. It shows you different projections of what it looks like over the coming century and over the coming centuries, rather. And there are a few different projections. So you have in blue the low emission scenarios, and in red the higher emission scenarios. And what I wanted to focus on here, because I am studying glaciology, is the fact that on the far right there, you see these error bars that go very wide, up to 2300. And that is mainly due to a lot of uncertainties we have in our understanding of the physics of the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheet, primarily Antarctica. This is the same figure from a previous special report that came out, and where I want you to focus on the Antarctic ice sheet mass loss there in the middle. And it is a significant contributor to this uncertainty, how wide the red bar is. And it is unquantified. But then I also do want to mention that, the direction of sea level, we know what's happening. It is going up. Ice mass is losing, is being lost. And the question really is not if it is rising, but when and by how much, in which regions, and so on. So for the first part, I'll be talking about global sea level and what that has to do with our ice sheets. I'll be focusing on Antarctica. In the background there is a picture of the Ross ice shelf taken from a ship, I think sometime in 1997. Ice shelves are these gigantic, sort of majestic extensions, floating extensions of the Antarctic ice sheet. They can be anywhere from tens to hundreds of meters thick, most of it below the water. And this is just to give you a sense of scale. And what happens in Antarctica, I'll just play this video there, which is a pretty nice simulation of what's been going on, which is not playing, but I'll let it go. So what happens in Antarctica is that waters that are warming around the Antarctic region.
Point it to the computer.
Yeah.
Not the screen.
It's nope. Sorry about that. And I'll just go back to that. But what happens in Antarctica with these ice shelves is that you have ocean waters that are warming and sort of intruding underneath these floating extensions of the ice sheet, the ice shelves that I was just talking about. And they go underneath and melt the ice from below. And to give you a better description here, but as they melt the ice from below, that's when we have ice sort of thinning on these ice shelves. And once that thins, it sort of reduces the force that these ice shelves provide to stabilize the ice within the ice sheet. And that ice flows out and sort of contributes to sea level. This is just a map of different ice shelves around Antarctica, just to orient you. The left side of this is what we generally call West Antarctica, and the right there is East Antarctica. And in white are the different ice shelves. For instance, Ross in the middle at the bottom, and Filchner-Ronne on top in the left, and so on. And a lot of this has to do with how ocean currents are flowing underneath the ice. And that has to do with what the bed topography underneath the Antarctic ice sheet looks like. And this is, I think, one of our most recent estimates of what that bed topography looks like. So this is a map of what the bedrock underneath about 3 to 4 kilometers thick ice looks like. So in blue is where, on the west side, you can already see that it is kilometers under the sea. And on the right, which is East Antarctica, it is actually higher up. So the reason this is important is because when the bedrock is below sea level, it's sort of, because of the physics of ice flow in these ice sheets, it can sort of lead to instabilities. And you might have sometimes heard of this called as the marine ice sheet instability. So what happens there, just to give you, orient you again, is this is again another figure of the ice shelf that is floating on top of water. and there's a water mass. The circumpolar deep water mass, which is a warm ocean water, which can intrude into these cavities underneath this ice shelf. It thins that ice shelf, melts it, which means the ice flow from the top left begins to increase because the grounding line, which is the dashed line, sort of begins to recede inwards towards the ice sheet. And as that happens, it sort of reduces the stabilizing force, ice flow increases. And because we have a bedrock that is the way it is, where it deepens as you go inland, uh, it sort of has this own self-fulfilling feedback loop, wherein the ice flow exponentially increases because the thickness at the region where the grounding line is sort of increases. And you have sort of a receding ice sheet that can rapidly collapse. So this is again just another schematic of the different ways that the ice sheet can melt, the ice sheet shelves can melt. I won't go into too much detail here, but what I want you to take away is that ice shelf melt occurs in very complex patterns of variability. And what I mean by that is it can vary in time. So this is those figures on the right there. Those are from satellite records that were published a few years ago. We have amazing satellites now to sort of take a look at the entire continent, and it varies quite a bit in terms of which part of the ice shelf you're looking at and at what depth it is. So it might be going down, it might sometimes be sort of thickening, but overall the trend is has been around what I'm showing there. And there is a lot of variability, and this does not include the trend, by the way. And then this is how it varies spatially. So the hues of green are the darker green colors mean there are warmer ocean waters close to the ice shelf. And sort of the yellowish colors are where it's colder waters. And you can see there that in the red and blue, where you have different patterns of melting and freezing going on in different regions of the ice sheet. And it is highly variable across like different catchments, different regions of the ice sheet, as well as within each particular ice shelf as well. So it is fairly complex. Now, the thing is, I talked about the ice sheet instability, and I've written it right there. It can potentially shift the uncertainty I was mentioning earlier in projections towards worst case scenarios. So we're talking about skewing the spread of uncertainty towards away from the best case to the worst case. So just to give you a sort of schematic of that consider that to be the ice volume being lost over time, maybe into the future. And those are each black line is a different sort of plausible pathway of what the ice sheet might evolve and look like. So closer to the start, when you look at the distribution, I swear this is the only probability distribution map you might be looking at in this presentation. Closer to the start, you have a fairly symmetric sort of spread, wherein, as ice volume lost is more, it's sort of fairly in the middle. And as you go closer towards the end, the distribution tends to be negatively skewed. And what that means is, again, what I was just saying is that it skews the projections towards or away from the best case scenarios that we might have in some of our emissions pathways. And that is why it is quite important to sort of study this variability as well, and how it might introduce or change our understanding of global sea level in the coming centuries. I won't go into this too much. But again, the other thing is that these instabilities also amplify this uncertainty. But the main point is, again, that it skews. So one of the projects that I'm working on currently is to do with, trying to understand what the role of this variability is in sort of influencing future Antarctic ice mass loss. And I use computer models, numerical or computational models to do this. And this is an important question also because it sort of complements some other cutting edge ongoing work that's happening wherein, there are other researchers in the field who are looking at trying to attribute sea level rise to anthropogenic or human caused global warming as well. So we can use numerical models of the ice sheet to sort of explore this. And that, for instance, is just a sort of depiction of what the ice speed looks like at one particular point in time over the map. And in addition to models, we also have incredible satellites. We can use the satellite records. There have been published data from recent years of trying to get very high resolution or high resolution as possible at pan-Antarctic level, at least. And this is a record from the last 30 years or so, showing again what the melt looks like in this region. And the other thing I didn't mention earlier on is that it is variable in space, but also in 3D. So even with the depth or underneath the ice shelf, you have how complex the melt occurs. So this, for instance, is just one simulation output showing you what the ice loss looks like without any sort of future warming scenarios. So we're considering, say, a current global sort of climate, and these are very initial estimates, but considering just say, you stop emissions today or something like that, how much the ice sheet might recede. And this is just one from an ensemble of simulations, and that is ongoing work. But what I want you to take away here is that there is, of course, going to be retreat. We have already committed sea level rise to a certain extent as well. But yes, future work will include trying to do the same thing for different scenarios. We will be tying it up with the SSPs and possibly some of the other indices if possible as well. And try and get to a sense of what the Antarctic ice sheet will sort of evolve into over the next 300 years, is the idea. But, I've been talking a lot about the global sea level part of it. And I'm beginning to think now more on the local sea level scale. And that is something that's exciting me a bit more. And that is actually upcoming work. And I'll just give you a sort of case of what's happening in the state of Georgia in the US. So again, local sea level, when you move away from the global, it is influenced by a lot of different sort of physical processes. You have sea level rise there, which is what I've been talking about so far. But you also have at the local scale, you have storm surges, tides, you have river flow, runoff from inland if you're in a marshy area like Georgia, and groundwater tables and vertical land motion as well. For instance, in the US East Coast, which is said to be sort of experiencing most of the brunt of this. And the thing here to take away is that global models, global climate models, for instance, that might provide you sea level rise projections over long time scales might not be enough to capture very specific local hydrodynamics, hydrology, and so on, very local sort of physics that are very critical for communities who live in different regions. So, coastal sea level projections right now for the place I'm talking about in Georgia lack either the spatial resolution, you want to get really high resolution flood risk maps, for instance, and you want them to be of long decadal timescales. So if you're a business or a public institution trying to think about what flood might look like or the local water level might look like at a building scale, it's going to be pretty important to have very high resolution. This is again the projected sea level rise at that one tide gauge for that entire state. And you can see it follows fairly the same trends as in the sort of global sort of SSP scenarios. But again, what I want you to take away is that for coastal flood risks at a very local scale, you want to be sort of thinking about modeling at a very sort of hyper-local scale. So in this case, one of the questions we're trying to tackle is how can we actually provide decadal scale high resolution projections for these areas, right? And the idea here is that you want to take the best projections we have at the global scale, the general circulation models, the AOGCMs, which might be very coarse, right? An entire grid cell, your state might fit into one entire grid cell of one of these models. And try to combine that with very specific local models that have been developed in those regions, which are attuned to the physics of those regions as well. So this is actually upcoming work. And I'll just talk a little bit about the model that some of my colleagues have worked on in the last few years. You don't have to go into the details of that, but again, the inputs are that, Georgia, the geography of the coast of Georgia is fairly complex. We're taking in a bunch of different inputs, tides, observations of different kinds, atmospheric and climate models, and then actually my colleagues have set up a model that sort of incorporates a lot of complex physics of the region to get to a total water level of local sea level at a fairly, that is able to match the observations pretty well. So for instance, this is the same city of Savannah. So you have modeled water level after a hurricane in 2016. So the color bar there gives you a sense of what the inundation might look like. And this map is with all the different sort of components that might drive this. And you want to get to a better understanding of, if you have a river in the region, is that what's causing, because of precipitation, is that what's causing the sort of flood inundation, as opposed to something from the ocean and so on. So, and this model is able to do that. So you have, for instance, you can get to a sense of what the atmospheric influence is if you have rainfall, and the deep ocean influence as well. How is that driving sort of the shelf inundation and precipitation, which I was talking about just now, to do with river runoff from inland. But the thing is, these are models, again, physics-based, very complex to run, and we now live in a data-driven world. So we are sort of trying to, make use of new technologies, trying to use machine learning and use and get to a better and more efficient way of providing these very hyper-local sea level rise projections that would be useful in these regions as well. That is upcoming work. I'm hoping to I've just begun this and thinking about, how to set up all of this stuff. But I think that will be all for me. And I'll just leave this video again of Tybee Island and take any questions if you have any. And yes, thanks to a bunch of my collaborators at the National Labs who've been kind enough to, provide me their expertise and data and help me out quite a lot as well.
What is the difference between the temperature of the surface ocean and the base water, which is melting the ice sheet from the base?
Yes. So the basal waters are, so it depends again where you're looking at. In Antarctica, because in Greenland you are looking at more surface-driven melt, and in Antarctica the basal melt is definitely more prominent. In terms of the differences, I don't know a specific number for the surface.
Is it like warmer or colder?
It is definitely warmer. Yes, because you have deep water. So in Antarctica, it's the deepest waters, the circumpolar deep water, which is essentially the water masses at the bottom of the ocean, really, that sort of come into underneath the ice and are actually warmer than the water that's actually present already there. We have a pretty nice figure for that. Let's see. But yes, there is. Yeah. So these waters are much warmer compared to what is above. And you have different types of water masses sort of influencing melt in different ways too.
But isn't it counterintuitive to have base water?
Yes. So here, for instance, the surface waters along the bottom, or like along the sort of ice margin, I guess, is along the ice margin. So it is much closer to the freezing point. And along the surface, you have sea ice cover, sometimes in winters, which can also sort of, how would I put it, reduce the temperature. But also the other thing to keep in mind is it's at the bottom because it's the densest or heaviest water masses. It's going down there, and that means, and it's also experiencing a lot more pressure. So that would also sort of contribute to it. Thank you. Sure. Same. Oh, oh wait, no. So you mean in terms of comparing the melt in Antarctica?
Yeah, in terms of sea level rise.
Right. So, for instance, for the Antarctic work, we work with ice sheet models that are specifically designed to sort of, see how an ice sheet might evolve, and this can happen over centuries, thousands of years, millennia as well. And for this particular work, it's mainly trying to incorporate what the ocean actually looks like. So, how warm is this water that's going in different places around the continent, and how is it different as well, and what are those sort of how variable is it? So that is one of the main things that we look at. In terms of a general ice sheet model itself, you're trying to model the sort of how fast the ice speed is on the surface, how much it flows, how fast it flows, and you have different ways of doing that as well. So you had a question.
It's the key about having warm water low as each chemical. That's all about sulfur. And the density of those around 4 degrees. I've got a question. So, London adaptation plan published earlier this year. I'm a climate scientist in my background in climate communication. They have considered future sea level rise scenarios, considered that because we don't know the information to have various plans that they would then enact if it is slightly faster than they would like it to be. Is that something you're seeing in, say, Georgia or other places that say their response to sea level change was in
Yeah. So I don't know specifically about the state of Georgia, but for instance, there have been different states in the U.S. where they've been putting out these sort of sea level policy adaptation plans that have been quite critical and actually incorporating a lot of the ice sheet science that's present. And in terms of trying to adapt to different sort of scenarios of projections, they definitely talk about it in the policy documents. There is a guidance you can actually look up the California state report. I can share it later. And it does talk quite a bit about, the language does talk quite a bit about different scenarios and sort of what the decadal or centuries time scales might be. And that's pretty good. I don't know if within the state of Georgia, there is one. At a national level, there have been sort of different institutions public institutions that have put out like very focused sort of guidelines or reports rather that sort of basically assess and translate the language of the IPCC as it pertains to the local coastlines of each state and so on. So there is a sea level rise technical report from NOAA a couple of years ago that goes into this in detail as well.
So the IPCC asks them to be very, very conservative in sea level rise because they didn't include ice dynamics.
They had the low likelihood high warming.
Yeah, they put it out there, but I'm not sure. What report would you go to now for a more up-to-date understanding of future sea level that does include ice sheet dynamics?
Well, it does include ice sheet dynamics. It's only that the IPCC sort of incorporates, well, it does put it in, but it does focus more on what has been traditionally used in terms of the outside SSPs. But also, I think there are way more experienced glaciologists than me in this audience who might also know. But there are definitely, in terms of more updated ones, amongst the glaciology community, for instance, like with the global climate models, we have intercomparison model projects as well. So there is the ice sheet model intercomparison. They just published a paper like a few months ago, I believe, and it's in its 7th iteration, sort of following along these sort of intercomparisons for the global climate models, if you're aware of that. So those have some of the, I would say, ongoing debate and conclusions on what this might look like, what the uncertainty is, what the sort of probability distributions might be, what are the different models, what are the different groups who are using this. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the questions. Yeah. If there's nothing else, I thank you all for sitting here and enjoy lunch.